Hi, I'm Jeff Mikels, and I want to help you get back to the Jesus of the Bible. As we open up Matthew 22, we notice it begins with 14 scary verses that form a kind of bridge between the harsh words of chapter 21 and the confrontation Jesus is about to have with the religious leaders. Recall how chapter 21 ends. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard Jesus' parables, they knew he was talking about them. They looked for a way to arrest him, but they were afraid of the crowd because the people held that he was a prophet. And here's what Matthew 22:15 says. Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. These two verses, two passages, sound a lot like each other. They both are passages about the Pharisees finally deciding that they need to do something about Jesus. They need to get rid of him. But there are 14 verses between them. And clearly Matthew is trying to do something with these 14 verses. And I think it's something related to explaining why the Pharisees made the choices they made. You see, with Matthew, there's a massive historical dilemma that's going on. And let me try to outline it for you in some simple terms. From Matthew's perspective, Jesus has ticked all the most important boxes that qualify him as the Messiah. At this point in the story, we already know that his genealogical record makes him eligible to be the king better than David. As an infant, we know that he was honored by foreigners, the same way that King Solomon was. In Jesus' ministry, he was recognized by John, the prophet, like Elijah. Jesus brought a new law down from the mountain, just like Moses did. Jesus displayed the ultimate power of God and fulfilled prophecy after prophecy. But the religious leaders of the day didn't accept him as the Messiah. And that's the dilemma. How is it that this man, who in so many ways proved that he was the Messiah, was not accepted by those who were most attuned to see him when he came? Why? Well, Matthew 21 gave us some explanation, but not everything. Now, if you remember in Matthew 21, Jesus enters Jerusalem on a donkey, and that fulfilled many prophecies. He then went to the temple, which fulfilled more prophecy. Jesus then aggressively kicked out the Jewish merchants from the court of the Gentiles, fulfilling more prophecy. But if you were paying attention, you noticed that none of those prophecies were fulfilled the way people expected the Messiah to fulfill those prophecies. That whole temple thing, it might have been the real clincher, because at the moment, Jesus literally prioritized Gentiles above Jews. The old prophecy had predicted that God would open his temple to all people from all nations, but no one expected that would come at the expense of the Jewish people. No one ever expected that God would welcome the Gentiles, but kick the Jews out. In so many ways, Jesus fulfilled prophecies, but from the perspective of the religious leaders, he fulfilled them incorrectly. And since they were scholars, they knew that they were right. They knew what was supposed to happen. They were convinced their understanding was the correct understanding. And so they had to conclude that Jesus, whatever he was definitely the wrong sort of Messiah. He was even a false Messiah, if anything. So in all of that, the religious leaders couldn't accept him. They couldn't accept how he treated the Gentiles. They couldn't accept how he welcomed the lame, the lepers, the blind, the young or poor, and certainly not the way he treated sinners and tax collectors. On top of that, they couldn't accept what he taught, as if he somehow was better than Moses. And they couldn't accept a Messiah who pretended to be a triumphant king, but didn't do anything about Rome or their Roman oppressors. You see, they couldn't accept him. And once we list these reasons, it kind of makes sense to us why they couldn't. But according to Jesus, something deeper was going on. In the parables of chapter 21, Jesus had hinted at it. He had said the religious leaders of the Jews simply refused to do what the Father wanted. He said they rejected the Messiah to keep the blessings of authority for themselves. But still, that's not a full explanation. I mean, sure, the religious leaders weren't doing what the Father really wanted, but the question is why? Why weren't they doing what the Father wanted? After all, they certainly talked like the Father's will was all important to them. They certainly kept rigid adherence to the laws of God. But for some reason, they were completely blind to the real will of God. They knew the prophecies, but for some reason they were completely blind to the one in their midst who kept fulfilling them. They were wrong about their expectations, but despite all of the evidence, they just couldn't admit their error. Why? Also, we can certainly understand their desire to protect their authority and power. That makes sense to us. If you're a person who is in power and wants to stay that way, you would do whatever it takes to protect it. But if we're honest, these leaders didn't even have any power. They didn't actually want power. Remember, their real enemy was Rome. And these people acted like they wanted a divine work of God to come and defeat Rome to save them. But none of these religious leaders had ever taken up arms. They didn't have the courage to fight Rome. They all wanted someone else to do it. They wanted someone with more power than them, someone with miraculous power. So still the question is why? Why, when there actually is someone right in front of them with the power that Jesus has demonstrated, why wouldn't they have eagerly welcomed him? Why would they reject the one who calmed storms, healed lepers, and provided miracle food? It just doesn't make sense. We can list all of the reasons why they might have rejected Jesus, and all of those reasons kind of fall short. And I can sympathize. I mean, I feel that dilemma about the Pharisees in our world today. You see, I've been facing a personal dilemma for a number of years now. For about a decade now. I've been utterly baffled by the dual allegiance people in America have to their own personal idea of Jesus, and the way that they've also become loyal to specific political ideologies, specific ideologies about national power and national influence of so-called Christian people over the country. I've been especially baffled by the Christian support of something called America First, or Make America Great Again, that whole movement. I simply can't understand it. I can't for the life of me figure out why people who have devoted their lives to the supreme authority of Jesus would also so highly value the authority of an earthly person like Donald Trump. I've been so baffled by this that I wrote a book about it, trying to outline some rational explanations for how we got to this place, and how, in fact, I think I was a contributor that kind of exacerbated the problem with a negative discipleship. But Matthew 22 starts with 14 verses that give a reason deeper than all the other reasons. It gives Jesus' own explanation for why the Pharisees couldn't accept him. In fact, I probably should have just simply quoted these 14 verses, but instead I wrote a whole book trying to answer them myself. But the reason in these verses, even though it's given by Jesus, and even though we know it's true, it's honestly just not very satisfying, because it describes a truth that can't be fixed by human ingenuity. It's a truth, it's something that can't be fixed by teaching someone new information or helping someone to, quote unquote, get their act together. And honestly, I don't like problems that can't be fixed. Particularly, I don't like problems that I can't fix. But Jesus says there are some problems just like that, some issues, some situations that humans can't fix, because for his own reasons and his own purposes, God has chosen to let them be so. There are some people who won't follow Jesus or can't follow Jesus because for God's own reasons, he has chosen to make it so. In the first 14 verses of Matthew 22, Jesus makes a point that some people are outside the kingdom specifically because God has not chosen to let them in. Some people don't respond properly because God didn't empower them to. Now, listen, there's been a debate among Christians for a very long time. It's a doctrinal debate about how much free will humans actually have and how much of the relationship humans have with God is based on God's own divine choice. And most of those debates center on some teachings that come from the Apostle Paul. But frankly, Paul got all of his ideas from Jesus. So let me show you what Jesus said. And it's not very comforting, but honestly, it is helpful. Let's actually read the passage, 14 verses from Matthew 22. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who'd been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, 'Tell those who've been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fattened cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find.' So the servants went out to the streets and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. He asked, 'How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend?' The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendants, 'Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen.'" Now, Matthew doesn't write down an explanation of this parable. And so that means Matthew must have thought the meaning was self-evident. There are lots of other parables where Matthew records the disciples going up to Jesus. "Jesus, what did this parable mean?" And then Jesus describes it. Or maybe Matthew himself will describe a parable, but this one has no explanation. So there's no deep hidden meaning. All of the meaning must be right there in the words themselves. And if you've been reading Matthew up to this point, especially Matthew 21, the context gives us almost everything we need to understand this parable too. So let's break it down into 7 specific points. First, Jesus starts the story with, "The kingdom of heaven is like." And according to the previous parables, that means that Jesus is telling a story to teach a specific principle of the kingdom. This is a principle that he's going to give at the end, so be ready for it. But we can conclude at the beginning that what we're about to see is really a story about the kingdom of heaven. So, in the story, we find a father who is trying to throw a bridal party for his son. And from the context of the previous parables, it's pretty safe to conclude that the father in the story represents God, and the son represents Jesus. So this wedding party thrown for the son represents the start of the kingdom, the inauguration of the kingdom. You might even think about it as the wedding party being a metaphor of the son's coronation. God is appointing the son to be the king. It's the start of the kingdom. Secondly, we learn that some have been invited for a long time, but when the day actually arrives, they just aren't interested, even after multiple attempts to bring them in. Again, because of the previous chapter, we can conclude that these long-invited people are the religious leaders who are rejecting Jesus. The long-invited people are the religious leaders rejecting Jesus. Third, the messengers sent by the Father were mistreated and even killed. And that also parallels the previous stories where Jesus talks about the messengers of the Master who then get killed by the people who don't receive them as being metaphors of the prophets God has sent. Matthew has already told us about the death of John the Baptist, and Jesus will continue to reaffirm the theme that the people of Israel have rejected the prophets. So that means these rejected messengers are the prophets. Fourth, the people who rejected the invitation will be destroyed, and their city will be burned. Remember back in chapter 21, Jesus proclaimed a veiled judgment over the city of Jerusalem when he withered the fig tree. But in chapter 24, Jesus will be even more explicit when he declares that the temple and everything around it will be thrown down. He says, all of this will be destroyed. And so the city in this parable actually stands for Jerusalem, or perhaps all of biblical religious Israel. Jesus is saying that whole system is getting thrown down. Fifth, the previously invited are now completely rejected. And new people are invited, specifically new people who are both the bad and the good. This is going back to chapter 21. Remember back in chapter 21, Jesus said, I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to you to show you the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and prostitutes did. And even after you saw this, you did not repent and believe him. So Jesus there is saying that John had been a prophet, and these people had the opportunity to respond to him, and they didn't. Once again, we see this picture that Jesus is saying the old people are rejected, but the new people are the Gentiles and the sinners. So in this parable, we've already sort of decoded everything about it. But there are a couple other things. A sixth and a seventh point that we haven't seen before in any other parable. And this part of the story doesn't relate to anything before or anything after. It's totally new information, completely new information about how the kingdom of heaven really works. So at the end of this story, there's a man who comes to the party, but he's not wearing the proper clothes. That is, he's not wearing respectful clothes. He's come for the benefits of the party, the benefits of the banquet, but he's done so in a way that doesn't honor the Son. The man is a freeloader. He's a leech, a party crasher. He's in it for himself. And therefore, he too has, in his own way, rejected the Son. He's responded to the promise of the party, but he's failed to honor the guest of honor. And so the Father kicks him out too. And that leads us to a conclusion that if the party is the kingdom and the Son is Jesus, then joining the party requires honoring the Son, or maybe just to say what we think Jesus is saying by it, entering the kingdom requires honoring Jesus. But at the very end, the seventh observation is the main moral of the whole story, and it is unique. It's the first time in Matthew we really have gotten this clear of a statement from Jesus about this particular doctrine of the kingdom. Jesus says, "Many are invited, but few are chosen." And that must mean that the kingdom of heaven is like something to which many are invited, but few are chosen. This is the part that baffles and disturbs me, and I'm not alone. It's the part that baffles and disturbs scholars throughout the centuries. It's the reason there's a debate between human free will and God's divine choice. We read words like this, and we just don't want to accept them as they are written. See, there's a man in the story who's invited, and he actually chose to come. And don't we want to honor people who respond to the invitation of God? But this man responded. He came in such a way that demonstrated something was amiss with him. He wasn't all the way in for the right reasons. And so I want to blame him. I want to blame his choice. He was being disrespectful. The solution, if I'm going to be gracious, would be to send him home to make a better choice. Go home, dude. Get some better clothes. Or maybe I'm just going to be gracious to him. I'll find a jacket. I'll find a tie. I'll find something else that he can wear. And I'll say, after all, he was invited and he responded. Isn't that what we really want? Don't we just want the place to be filled with guests? No. We don't just want the place to be filled with guests. We want the place to be filled with guests who honor the Son. But even though I want to blame the man for not honoring the Son, Jesus doesn't. The Father asks a question, kicks the guy out, but then the moral of the story isn't, so make sure you come to the party ready for the party. Jesus says something else completely. He states a principle, a universal principle. Many are invited, but few are chosen. Sometimes people respond, but the manner of their response, the extent of their response, reveals this deeper truth. Were they chosen? Not everyone who's invited is also chosen. But those who are chosen respond properly. Those who are not, do not. What do we do with this? For a moment, let's just keep it in the context of Matthew 22. In this chapter, we have to make two very uncomfortable conclusions. First, the invited people who rejected the invitation rejected it because they weren't chosen. And two, the disrespectful freeloader was being disrespectful because he wasn't chosen. And since the Father in the story is the one who makes all the final decisions, we have to conclude in some way or another that God is the one doing the choosing. So according to Jesus, when someone rejects him, it's because that person hasn't been chosen. And according to Jesus, when someone acts like a follower but doesn't truly respect Jesus, when they've tried to enter the kingdom but kind of falsely, it's because that person was never chosen. I'm honestly not very comfortable with that. As I said before, I would much rather blame the person who rejects Jesus, or blame the person who is a selfish, fake follower. If I can blame that person, then maybe I could fix that person. See, if it's that person's fault, then maybe I could come up with a better argument, or maybe I could come up with a better way to reveal to them the truth, or something. If I can blame them, then maybe there's a spot in the place for me to fix them. But according to Jesus, the real reason these people are not authentic followers is simply that they were never chosen to begin with. This isn't the only time we read this coming from the mouth of Jesus. We could skip over to the Gospel of John. In fact, let me show you that. These two verses from the Gospel of John. Jesus says, "And this is the will of him who sent me, that I shall lose none of all those he has given me, but raise them up at the last day. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them, and I will raise them up at the last day." Here's the uncomfortable truth from Jesus himself. If a person is chosen by God, that person will be drawn to Jesus, and Jesus will make sure that person stands firm with him until the last day. But if a person is not chosen by God, that person will never be able to fully come to Jesus. They will either reject him outright or they will follow him selfishly. Put another way, in order for a person to become a Christian, the Father must do a work of choosing. If a person rejects Jesus, falls away, or follows him falsely, it's proof that the Father never chose that person. So now we have an answer to our question. Why did the Pharisees reject Jesus? Well, they'd been invited, but not chosen. And this answers other questions too. Why did Judas turn his back on Jesus? Well, he'd been invited, but not chosen. And today, why do seemingly faithful Christians turn their back on Jesus or his teaching and embrace other un-Christ-like earthly loyalties? Well, it's because they've been invited, but not chosen. I want you to know something. And I want you to be encouraged by this. If you have been chosen, you will honor the Son and can never fall away. Jesus will make sure of that. You will be an authentic follower who puts Jesus first in your life and walks his path the rest of your life. It's going to be glorious. You can trust that. If you've been chosen, you are locked in. But I also need to give you a warning. If you fall away, or if you're following him falsely, that's proof you were never chosen to begin with. Now listen, I want this to be something that I'm more responsible for. I want it to be something you're more responsible for. The whole idea of, am I chosen? Am I not chosen? How would I ever possibly know? I want to give you some clarity on that. You see, someone might say, I don't even know if I'm chosen. And so then someone else will come along and they'll make you some big promise and say, oh, you're totally chosen because you prayed some prayer. Or maybe someone else is going to try to make you feel guilty and they'll say, oh, you're totally not chosen because, see, you did that one little sin that one time. Or maybe there's this repeated sin that you keep doing and you keep asking God for forgiveness and whatever. Listen, the Apostle Peter knows you're going to ask that question. He probably asked it himself too. And so that's why he wrote in his letter, 2 Peter, he says this, therefore, my brothers and sisters, make every effort to confirm your calling and election. Election, your chosenness. For if you do these things, you will never stumble, and you will receive a rich welcome into the eternal kingdom of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. See, there's no mystical voice that you're going to hear that says, hey, you're chosen, you're good, rely on that. No, Peter says this is how you determine if you're chosen. You walk it. You walk it. You live it out. You make the effort to follow Jesus the way Jesus actually led. You make the effort to actually pay attention to your sin and ask God for cleansing and forgiveness when you notice it. You make the effort to truly, authentically have Jesus be your top allegiance. And if you do these things, you will never stumble and you will receive a rich welcome into the eternal kingdom. Meaning you'll never fall away, not that you'll never make a mistake. He's not saying that. He's saying you can rely on your chosenness. If you are chosen, you will honor Jesus above all others. You will never turn your back on him. But if you don't honor Jesus, or if you reject him, then you can know you were never chosen. And here's where it might be helpful to you. If you see another person who acts like a follower of Jesus, but is living a life that disrespects Jesus, well, you can know that they're not chosen, at least not yet. Pray for them. Pray that God chooses to choose them, and trust God anyway if he decides not to. Listen, you can't dress up the unchosen. You can't put on a jacket, give them a tie, and all of a sudden now they're chosen. You can't fix the false followers. You probably shouldn't even try, but you can join the party, you can honor the Son, you can pray for the other people, and you can keep inviting. That's all we can do. You have the opportunity to demonstrate your chosenness, and you have the opportunity to keep inviting others to the party. But don't let your heart be weary if you notice other people aren't living the way they should. Don't let your heart be weary if you see other people who are rejecting Jesus, if you see other people who are false followers. Just pray for them. Maybe one of these days God will choose them and they will then join the party. But until then, at least know that you can join the party and you can honor the Son. I hope this in some way has been encouraging to you. I hope it challenges you to actually live according to Jesus's leading, to live according to his teaching, to have him be the center of your life. I hope it challenges you to do that, but I also hope for you and for me that it encourages us that we don't need to fix other people. We probably can't. And as a matter of fact, sometimes those people are the way they are because God just simply hasn't broken into their life yet. So pray for them. And maybe you should share this with them. Oh, if this has been a challenge or an encouragement to you, well, let me encourage you to just do the thing the algorithms want you to do. Like, subscribe, do whatever it is that the algorithm wants you to do in this particular platform, wherever you're watching this on YouTube or listening on a podcast. Let me invite you to do that so that then those computer things will share it where they need to go. But I'll also encourage you to maybe just email a link to this to someone you know and say, hey, listen, I know you've been worried. I know you've been concerned. I know you've been wondering. I know you've been confused. Well, the Bible has an answer for the thing you've been wondering about. And point them to Jesus. Because that's what I hope for you. It's what I hope for me. I hope that we can be the people who put Jesus first and help others to do the same.